Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge we are in Treaty One territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Inuit, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. I'd like to introduce the panel this afternoon, as well as the secretary to the board and the assessor representing the city's assessment department. Diane Knight and Lynn Nesbitt via Zoom are here this afternoon. And myself, I'm Mike Caltruglio. I'll be chairing this hearing. From the assessment department is Cam Wong, and the administrative personnel is Zachary Moen. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note you are placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along on the City of Winnipeg's Board of Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host submits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We'll be hearing applications for the revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested has been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by council and is independent of it and the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note the board's decisions with respect to application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if matter pertains to the application of exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all evidence about the application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We'll be hearing items 3 and 6 on our docket today. Mr. Mohan, please affirm the assessor and the applicant's testimony.
Of course, Mr. Chair. Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Cam Wong.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. As applicants. Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this, first please state your full name, my bad.
Sarah Cates.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
say
Good afternoon, both. And Mr. Wong, would you like to walk us through your presentation for 437 Hamilton Avenue?
Yes, thank you. The subject property is 437 Hamilton Avenue. The file number is 24-1490. The roll number is 072-180-63200. The roll year is 2025, and the assessed value is $8,419,000. This is a residential apartment. It's 2 stories high. It was built in 1975, and it has 72 suites with 72 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is a picture of the subject property with its location, just in the west end of the city by the perimeter and Portage Avenue. On page 4 are some interior photos of the subject property. So it has been improved beyond its original condition. On page 5 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $1,045 to get a potential income of $902,000. We used a 2.6% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $879,000. And we used a 49% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $441,000. Capped at 5.25% to have an estimated market value of $8,419,000, which is about $116,000 per unit. On page 6 are some rent comparables showing that the rents we've applied are in line with the market. On page 7 is a summary of the income and expenses submitted by the owner. Their income for 2022 is $886,000 and their expenses were $580,000. But within their expenses, it included some expenses such as the major repair and replacement. The major repair and replacement includes items such as replacing appliances, replacing flooring, and replacing the kitchen countertops and the cabinets. So from our point of view, those are typically capital expenditures, and we don't normally include those in the calculation of the net operating income. So in the chart there, I've removed the major repair and replacement. And so that gives their expenses to be $389,000 and their estimated net operating income to be $497,000. That for $497,000, it supports the model's estimated net operating income of $441,000. On page 8 and 9 is information on how we derived our cap rates, and on page 9 are some cap rate sales that range from 3.46 to 5.74%. You can see some properties on page 9 that are outside the core area, such as 32 Arden and 150 Hendon. They both sold for about $125,000 per unit and $116,000 per unit, which is it supports the model's $116,000 per unit. On page 11 to 15 is the income and expenses submitted by the owner. If you go to page 14, the type is fairly a small font, but it lists the major repair and replacement items, and it includes items such as cabinet replacement and countertop replacement and replacing in-suite flooring and hot water tank replacement. So I think a lot of these major repair and replacement items are capital in nature, and that's why I removed it from the income summary. So to conclude, the actual NOI less the major repair and replacement, like I said, which includes the replacing cabinets and flooring and hot water tanks. After you remove that, it supports their net operating income, supports the model's net operating income, and the model cap rate is supported by market sales, and the overall value at about $117,000 per unit is supported by the sales of 32 Arden and 150 Hendon at about $125,000 a unit and $116,000 a unit. So the assessed value is well supported, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $8,419,000.
Okay.
Mr. Assessor, could you potentially like increase your microphone proximity or the volume on it? It's rather faint.
Okay. How is that? The same?
Marginally better.
Okay.
We're just, you gotta remember, Mr. Wong, that we are in a boardroom next to another boardroom with a hearing going on, so please forgive us, but we need you to speak up a little bit more.
Yeah. How's that? How's that?
A little better, thank you.
Okay, I'll just sort of be a little bit like this and we'll see how that goes. But did you want me to go through just my last little bit with regards to the conclusion of the property?
If you don't mind quickly reviewing it one more time, just so that we make sure that we've all heard it. I'm not sure if the other panel members were
Yeah.
having difficulty hearing it or not, but
We can hear
Uh,
well.
Oh, okay.
yeah, I
So,
was just, I've got a background going
Yeah.
on behind me that's causing it a little bit harder to hear. Sorry.
okay. No, it's no problem. So to conclude with the subject property, their actual net operating income less their major repair and replacement, which includes what we feel are capital items such as counters, kitchen counters, and cabinets, and a flooring, in-suite flooring replacement, and hot water tank replacement. We feel that's capital in nature, so we don't normally include that in their net operating income calculation. So when you remove the major repair and replacement, the actual net operating income supports the model's net operating income and is about almost 50,000 higher. So the model cap rate is supported by the market sales that have been presented, and the overall value at about 117,000 per unit is supported by market sales, the market sales of 32 Arden and 150 Hendon. Which at 150 Hendon is not renovated, and they sold at about 125 and 116,000 per unit. So that supports the models about 116, 17,000 per unit. So the overall assessed value is well supported, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value at 8,419,000.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wong. Appreciate you going back over it.
No problem.
Would you have any questions for the assessor at this time?
A few questions, thank you.
Go ahead.
So in terms of this property, would you agree that garden style properties such as this would typically run higher expenses than a standard apartment, given that it's wood frame, multiple buildings, pool, etc.?
Potentially, yes.
Okay. And then on your income value summary on page 5, so in terms of your expense ratio of 49.74%, had you considered any adjustments to the expense ratio based on the actuals?
I mean, no, but I mean, in this particular case, if you remove some of the major operating expenses, I think it might actually end up being less than 49%.
So on your page on page 7, your income and expense summary, where you're removing the major repair and replacement. So in terms of some of your comments where you said these items would be capital, like replacing floors or replacing countertops, but if you have 72 units and you replace the floor in a couple, would you still say that that's capital, even though it's going to be a recurring expense across many more units?
I think if it's improving maybe a unit beyond what it was originally, I think I would probably consider that capital in nature. And I think typically when these operators they claim these expenses, I don't know for sure, but I would think that they're putting this in their to the Canada Revenue Agency as capital expenditures. So I think it's fair to consider them capital.
Okay, but in your experience, wouldn't capital typically be items that you invest in and then you don't have to do again for many years, such as replacing the roof entirely or the hot water tanks or stuff like that?
I think that typically would be the case in the case where on my page 4, where if you look at a particular unit, if they replace the counters and the cabinets for that unit and the washroom, and they replace the flooring in that unit, if you just look at the individual unit, I don't think they're going to come back to that same unit and be doing that again next year or the year after. And so, like in my view, it seems like it's a long-term it's a long-term benefit.
Okay. And then on your cap rate table on page 8 with your range 4.75 to 5.45, do you have any information on how many sales were used to achieve that range? The location of those properties, what type of apartments they were?
No, we haven't. The only cap rate sales we provided are on page 9.
Okay. And then for your sales on page 9, you only have the final values, not the workups. Would that be correct?
That is correct. But I will say is that the net operating incomes were stabilized over 3 years for all the properties and applied against the sale price, and that's how the cap rates were calculated. So all the properties on that list have been stabilized over 3 years prior to the sale.
Okay, and then this final question, just looking at page 6 where you have your rent comps and it shows a comparison of the sizes of different properties. You would agree that these units at this property are quite a bit smaller than comparable properties would be, so potentially that would be driving per unit values down. Would you agree with that?
That is potentially the case, but as you're mentioning with these garden style properties, the comparable properties, they might include common areas like corridors and stuff, and in the subject property there would be um, uh, no corridors. Uh, yeah, basically it potentially could be the case in terms of what you said in terms of driving the value down.
Okay, thank you. That would conclude my questions, and then I have some rebuttal whenever we get to that point.
Thank you, Ms. Gates. Ms. Nesbitt, do you have questions at this point?
Yeah, just pursuing the comments made about garden style apartments. Are any of your comparables garden style apartments? I see some of them have 14 floors, so I'm assuming that one's not.
I'm actually not 100% certain. They could be. They're likely a regular apartment.
And in your view, would regular style apartments with multi floors over 2, that is, be comparable to a garden style apartment?
I think they would be. I mean, they're not directly comparable, but I think we do the best we can in terms of trying to get comparable rents. We're not always able to get exact comparables in terms of, say, garden styles. So we just do the best we can with regards to finding comparables in a similar area to the subject property and construction year.
Okay, so in this case, those were the main factors, was area and construction year?
Yeah, you can
Okay.
see the comparables are built in a similar time frame and they are in a similar location. So
Okay, so the fact that none of them are, you said you believe they would be comparable. What makes them comparable?
the fact that they are built in and around the same time
The same time.
and they're in a similar location.
Okay, so that's the comparability, not in terms of the design or
No,
the type, just the area. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have no additional questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Knight, do you have questions at this point?
Just one. Would the walk-up apartment have a greater value than the 14-story building?
I in my experience, it seems like some of the higher stories might be a little bit higher in value. but generally speaking, when I was speaking to some of the properties that sold on Arden and Hendon, they're three-story walk-ups, and then they are in the neighborhood of about 125 to 116,000 per unit. So I'm not sure if there's like a great difference in value in terms of depending on the building type.
Yeah,
I'm not totally sure about that.
okay. I just know there's two buildings by where I live. That's one is exactly like the one we're looking at, and one is a 10 or 12 story building, and their rents are very similar.
Yeah. I think the high rise might be a little bit more similar. It might be a little bit higher in value. Maybe their expenses are a little bit lower because the building itself is a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
efficient. So
Mm-hmm.
there might be that aspect to it. But I personally haven't really seen uh, any great differences, distinguishers in terms of value, in terms of based on the building type.
Okay.
But it seems like yeah, the estimated value for the subject property is reasonable, and I'm pretty sure it's not on the high end of the range for values. But that's just I guess maybe my experience.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I guess from the perspective that we're trying to look at it from, Mr. Wong, is that um, I see that the subject property has a mix of units, a bachelor, a one bedroom, two bedroom, which is kind of in keeping with what you've shown us in comps, correct?
Yes.
And I also note the information that you brought forward saying that these multi-story buildings have hallways, common areas, etc., that might add to the per square foot of each suite. Is that correct?
Yes, if they didn't have those common areas, the gross floor area per unit might be a little bit less,
And more in keeping with the subject at that point being a garden type apartment, correct?
potentially.
Okay. Um, it may have been interesting to see another garden apartment as a comparable here to see how close it might have been.
Yeah, it might have been at the same time. When you look at the actual rent that they've taken in, it does appear to be in line with the model. It's like the income, their actual income is about 886,000, and the gross effective for the model is about 879,000. So it appears to be pretty close in that regard when it comes to the amount of income being generated.
Point taken. Thank you very much. Ms. Gates,
Thank
I'd
you.
love to hear from you at this point.
So if you turn to page 2 of my brief, we have a summary of some of the facts of the assessment, as well as our requested value of $6,811,000. On page 6, we have some property maps. So we have an aerial map view of the parcel, and then a Google map view of the neighborhood. And then some exterior photos starting on page 7. So this property fronts on a few different streets, so I've just included different photos so you can see the comparison. On page 9, we have our property description. So the subject is on the north side of Hamilton at its intersection with Redfern Road in the Crestview area. There are 4 two-story garden-style buildings built in the mid-70s, and there are 72 units, including 6 bachelors, 34 one-bedrooms, and 22 two-bedroom units. There are 77 surface parking stalls, and the property also is noted to have an outdoor pool. And following the submission of evidence, just in reaching out to the owner to see how many of the units were actually renovated to the quality of the photos. Since 2018, there would be 17 units out of the 72 at the property. So just to give you a sense of how many are actually fully renovated versus how many would be in some combination of original or maybe partially renovated condition. On page 14, we have the overview of our income approach. So for the purposes of this report, we are applying potential market gross rents of $847,709 or $981 per unit per month. We are applying a market vacancy of 2.6%. And we are applying expenses of $481,919 or 55.2% of effective gross income. So one thing to note about these type of properties is that the repair and maintenance is higher than a standard apartment. So when we're looking at garden style apartments, which are wood frame with wooden balconies and staircases, a lot of the times they have individual systems within the units. And as well, this property has a pool, which can be quite expensive to maintain. Seeing values of repair and maintenance in the high 2,000 to low 3,000 per unit range isn't uncommon. And so this property, we have a stabilized repair and maintenance at $3,282 per unit. And in terms of addressing some of the earlier comments regarding capital or not capital, in our view, when we're doing our analysis, capital items would be those that occur that would typically be large and that they wouldn't occur again for maybe 20 years, such as replacing a roof, replacing hot water tanks, or other type of extraordinary repairs. So when we're looking at flooring replacement, counter replacement, things of that nature, just to echo comments from earlier, even if you replace those in a couple of units per year, you still have 72 units at this property. So you still have a lot of other replacements that would be required. So it's not to say you're going to be doing those same units again, but to say that those would be considered more of a recurring expense because they would repeat to fix up the other units as well. So on page 15, we have the overview of our cap rate. So we're applying a cap rate of 5.75%. So based on our cap rate study from the age, we would look at a base cap rate of 5.5%. And we do consider adjustments based on different factors. So one of the adjustments that we would consider would be garden style, multiple buildings, wood frame. As well, I would note that there is a high proportion of smaller units at this property, which would be somewhat atypical for garden style. Like you'll note that they have bachelors and 1 bedrooms. Typically, when we're looking at this type, they would usually have more 2 and 3 bedrooms, so it'd be skewed toward larger units. So if you turn to page 17, we have our valuation breakdown. So we do a stabilization based on 3 years of data. So we would typically stabilize income based on the most recent year. In terms of vacancy, what we're looking at is what would be expected over the longer term of the property. So the vacancy will fluctuate, but we would apply a market vacancy of 2.6%. And when you actually work that out, that would be assuming that 1 to 2 units would be vacant, per year. So that would be pretty reasonable. When we look at the effective gross income after adding in the other forms of income at the property, we have a value of $873,578. We have total expenses of $481,919, gives us a net operating income of $391,658 with a 5.75% cap rate, gives an indicated value of $6,811,000. I've included our repair and maintenance breakdown for your review on page 18. So essentially, values that are highlighted in red have been excluded from the stabilized average. So what we do is we go through these repair and maintenance items line by line. And if something does appear to be an outlier, we will remove it. As well, for certain categories that you'll see, flooring, appliance, painting, counters, we do cap those values to make sure that everything is in range. So that's there for your review. And then I've also included our standalone cap rate study along with this submission in terms of just more background on our cap rates. I won't go through it. I know everyone's heard it, but essentially the cap rate study, we look to market reports. We've also reviewed the assessor's cap rate ranges, and then we have our own calculated cap rates based on stabilizing financials into a single year. And that's there for your review as well. So the appendix of the brief starts on page 20. I've included the marketing photos. So these would be the best photos at the property. the majority of the units wouldn't look like this. These would be kind of in that camp of the 17 that talked about that were renovated. And then I've also included the financials for your review. And that would conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cates. Mr. Wong, do you have questions for Ms. Cates at this point?
Yes. Just, I guess, going to page 21. Yeah, is everyone there?
Mhm.
Yes?
Yeah, so basically the cabinets that you see, the appliances that you see, the flooring that you see, all those items are listed under a major repair and replacement, are they not?
Based on my review of the financials, yeah, it looks like they're putting those replacements under the category of major replacement. But based on our review of this property as well as other statements, just because it's listed as major doesn't mean it can't be used in the repair and maintenance.
You're using these as repair and maintenance items?
Yeah, in our R&M breakdown on page 18, we've taken out obvious capital items like the roof hot water tank. And then other items are in our repair and maintenance chart, but you'll see that, for example, in the building exterior or plumbing, when amounts seem to be outliers, then we'll remove them.
Okay. And going to page 23. It looks like a pretty decent and well-maintained property, but you're making an adjustment from your 5.5 cap to a 5.75 cap for the subject property.
Yes, the adjustment wouldn't be based on condition. The property would be probably overall mostly in good condition, probably somewhere between average to good though in terms of units that have been occupied for a while. But yeah, it would be our practice to do an adjustment for this construction type. So it's not based on the condition.
Okay. And I guess in your cap rate study, did you have any, I guess, support for maybe Garden Styles home being a little bit higher cap rate?
We don't have any specific sales of garden style apartments in the cap rate. We didn't see any transactions of those in order to use.
Okay. That's all my questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Knight, do you have questions at this point?
So you're saying 981 per month, but that's based on the fact that he's only renovating a couple of suites a year?
Yes, they're only doing a couple a year. Essentially, they can only do them upon turnover, so it's really dependent.
So when you look at the expenses, they're only doing 2 a year, but they've done 17. Is that correct?
Yeah, 17 since 2018, and then 2023 and 2024 were 2 a year.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Nesbitt, questions at this point?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you very much. I note that the effective gross incomes that you have at 873,578 is within a few $1,000s of the assessment requirements. And long and short is we have a difference of opinion on your expenses as you've gone on a bit.
Mhm.
And of course, about a 0.5% cap rate difference. Does that pretty much sum up the point of it?
It does.
Okay. And forgive me, I'm gonna circle back to your contention that the cabinetry, et cetera, is, in your opinion, a justifiable annual expense, but yet those are relatively long-lived items, are they not?
They would be on a per unit basis. So for instance, when you replace the cabinets in a unit, you're not gonna be replacing those cabinets in that unit for a long time. But when we have a property that has 72 units, if you're doing a couple units a year, doing those replacements, you're still gonna have those consistent costs over a much longer span of the property. And so, for instance, when we're looking at, like, for example, on page 18, when we're looking at something like flooring, aside from 2019, which I've removed from the analysis, you know, every year they're kind of plugging along 15,000, 17, 19, 18. So the numbers are fairly consistent there, and we're looking over a 5-year period. And keeping in mind too, they've only done about 17. They're still gonna have quite a few more to do. So in our view, that would be a consistent expense.
And I understand what you're suggesting, but wouldn't it be similar in that, I believe there's about 4 buildings on site here that make up the subject property?
Yes,
So in the case of the subjects, let's say roof, and one building was done every 5 years. Because that's how they end up doing the roof repairs. It's still capital in nature, is it not?
yes, and we would take roof as capital, so
And so if it's capital in nature, whether it's done piecemeal or whether it's done all at once, it's still capital in nature, is it not?
I mean,
You get where I'm driving at here, right?
I believe I do, but in terms of the roof, I mean, yeah, typically you're gonna do a larger replacement, but you're right, you could have smaller repairs on the roof for sure, like we have here. In terms of the way we do our analysis, we would consider those items to be capital, and we always remove them, so roof, hot water tank,
Yeah.
and just like very extraordinary.
And I appreciate the nuance of it, I do.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to justify the position you're taking with the cabinetry, which to me would appear to be capital in nature. That's my take on it. So you're suggesting because it's done piecemeal, we should accept it as an annual expenditure.
That's what we would be suggesting, because if we're looking at operating expenses, the idea would be if things are gonna recur. We would take things out when they're capital, as you're suggesting with the roof, because you replace the roof, probably not gonna do it again for 20 years.
Yeah, and I guess it's the same thing with hot water tanks. I mean, they have a certain lifespan that you're not gonna be replacing those every time someone moves out, as an example, right?
Definitely.
No
Yeah.
different than the cabinetry. If a particular unit goes dark every other year, you're not gonna be replacing the cabinetry in that unit because once it's done, it tends to last longer, correct?
Typically, unless there's some sort of damage to the unit.
And I think I've made my point, I think you tried to make your point. I really appreciate your input in this, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, could I ask Ms. Cates a question, please?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you so much. Ms. Cates, you've assigned in your model a rent per suite of $981, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I'm looking at page 25 of your brief, which is the INE.
Yes.
And it refers to the gross potential suite income at 100% occupancy of 934. But yet your number for gross potential would be 847. Am I doing some kind of wrong math? And this 934 works out to 1081 or 1081 per suite. Could you help me just understand your model around the rent?
Yes, for sure. So it might be helpful to go back to page 17 just to do a comparison.
Sure.
So the figure that you're looking at, 934,696, if you look under the 2020 column.
2022, yeah.
Yeah, so that's up there. So the income and expense mailers don't have the designated spot to put discounts. So what ends up happening is people fill in the gross potential, and they don't have anywhere to put the discount. So you're correct, that would be the gross potential.
Okay.
But in terms of their own statements that they submit, they allude to discounts, which can happen when you have, like, so for example, when suites are renovated, they can apply to get RTB rent increases. But sometimes what they're allowed to charge in rent and what they're able to charge based on their knowledge of the property and the market in that area, there can be a discrepancy there. So discounts come into play in order to, I guess, mitigate vacancy issues and turnover at the property.
So with respect to this, we're seeing in your income line increase year over year with respect to your gross rents. And yet your stabilized is of course much lower than that. Why would you reduce the rents from a year over year? Like this would make it even less than 2021. Just a
So-
question on your methodology.
Yeah, for sure. So so essentially what happens is when they renovate the property and they apply for the RTB increases, if they don't take on those increases in terms of their property, then they can't go and put them in later. So what you'll see across a lot of different properties in the city is they report based on the maximum allowable that they can get for rents, but then like if you have a sophisticated property manager or owner, then they would usually understand that they can't always get those maximum rents. So it's essentially a question of keeping your rents, getting your rents to where like as high as you can, but not having a huge vacancy problem. So based on this, I mean, they're pretty consistent in their discounts at the property. So in terms of our methodology, we would look at the rent after discounts because that's what they're actually taking in. They're not taking in 934. They're taking in, about 850,000.
Right. Okay. Okay. Thanks for explaining that. No other questions, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And I have no further questions, so do we have any summation on either party? Mr. Wong?
No, thank you.
Ms. Kate?
I'm good. You have
rebuttal, do you not?
Yeah, I won't do a long presentation. I kind of just want it kind of on the record, so it's
Yep,
on the
that's
order.
fair. This is a good moment to do it then. How's that? And that would be rebuttal Altus cap rates?
Yes, this should be. Perfect. And Kyle, you have it? Should be on the SharePoint. You have to refresh.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Mr. Cesar, I just sent it to you, so it might be a couple more moments, but.
Okay.
Yeah. It's on route.
And then Ms. Cates, you just want to submit it as is and you want to review it at all or?
I'm good just to read it in and
Fair enough. You do it as you please.
thank you.
Okay, I just received it. So yeah, you can proceed.
Go ahead. Ms. Cates?
Thank you. So in terms of the rebuttal, we've provided essentially just broad overview. We've gone over some of the city's cap rates. We feel that the ones that are kind of artificially low should be looked at with some scrutiny. Just since we typically don't have 3.46, 4.21% cap rates in this market. And then additionally, we've just taken a look at their cap rates and done some calculations based on our own research and review, and those have been restabilized in the rebuttal for your review. And I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cates. Any final summations on either party?
No, thank you.
Ms.
Good
Cates?
as well.
You're good? Excellent. That concludes this particular property. Thank you very much for your submissions. And comments and we will. Jump to item number 6 on today's docket. That being 575 Hamilton Avenue.
475, sorry.
Oh, sorry, 475. My apologies. Yes, there it is. Oh my. 475 Hamilton Avenue, thank you. Mr. Wong, can we hear your presentation on this property today?
I did not call.
Oh, my apologies, this is the non-co-op. Well, let's have your evidence on non-co-op first, Mr. Wong, and we'll go from there.
Okay. I guess if you look on my page 2, you can see for
Oh, sorry, Mr. Assessor, just before we begin, could you read out the roll number into the record? My apologies.
yeah, no, for sure. The subject property is 475 Hamilton Avenue. The file number is 24-1789. The roll number is 072-134-26600. So if you go to my page 2, that's the history for us requesting and receiving information, income and expense information for the subject property. You can see in 2021 and 2022, we didn't receive a response from the owner, and normally we would have a certified letter for the property, but in this particular case, the owner had submitted a request for an extension and to submit their income and expenses. An extension was granted to June 30th, 2023, but we did not receive a response from them. But due to the fact that an extension request was granted, a certified letter was not sent out to request the income and expense information. So that's why we don't have it. We don't have the certified letter, but for the reasons that they didn't respond to our request for information for the 2022 information year, we're requesting that non-cooperation be applied in this instance.
Ms. Gates, you have something to add from your perspective regarding client not providing information.
Would you prefer a comment or a question format?
Comment at this point.
Okay, I guess my comment would be, I mean, nothing was really provided in the brief in terms of showing the request for extension, or where the mailer was sent. I get Mr. Wong's points about, regarding if they didn't send a registered mail, but none of the other documents are here, so I don't really feel the assessor has sufficiently discharged his duty in terms of burden of proof, so I'll just leave it there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think at this point, we will take a recess and discuss this amongst yourselves. So please and thank you. Thank you very much and welcome back.
We need the other guy yet.
Yes.
Oh, oops.
Mr. Wong.
Oops.
Welcome back, Mr. Wong. My apologies. We almost started without you. We couldn't go far, but we almost did.
I would have been okay with that.
Well, maybe not. Mr. Wong, your request for the burden to be placed on the applicant for non-cooperation has not been granted. And I would suggest to you very strongly, if in the future you have a scenario similar to this, that you bring us whatever evidence that the department has, letters, copies thereof, so that we can rest assured that all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. So for future reference, please make note of that.
Okay.
So with that in mind, please give us a presentation on 475 Hamilton. Thank you.
Okay, the subject property is 475 Hamilton. Excuse me for 1 sec, please.
Yep, go ahead.
The subject property is 475 Hamilton. The file number is 24-1789. The roll number is 072-134-26600. The roll year is 2025, and the assessed value is 7,762,000. This is a residential apartment that's 6 stories high. It's built in 1977 and it has 91 suites with 31 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is a picture of the subject property with its location. On page 4 is some information on the subject property. So you can see that this is a, just from the first paragraph, it's located in Lakewood neighborhood. Hamilton House provides affordable, safe, clean, and secure housing for seniors 55 and over. So it's basically affordable housing for seniors. Using income and expenses from like an affordable housing property, it wouldn't result in an accurate estimate of value. So we will default to the model parameters and value as if the property was a below average apartment building by using below market rents and expenses that are a little bit higher than market. On page 6 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $765 to get a potential income of $826,000. We use a 2.6% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $805,000, and we use a 49% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $407,000. Capped at 5.25%, we have an estimated market value of $7,762,000, which is about $86,000 per unit and about $133 a square foot. On page 7 are some rent comparables showing that the rents we've used are supported by the market, and the market is indicating rents probably are a little bit higher than what the model is utilized. On page 7 is the market rents from CMHC. Using the CMHC market rents, the CMHC market rents are about the rent potential is $1,051,000, whereas the models applied a potential rent of $826,000. So basically, it's the model. The CMHC market rents are about 27% higher than what the model is applied. On page 9 and 10 is information on how we derived our cap rates and some cap rate sales that range from 3.46 to 5.74%. And the last page of my brief is the CMHC market rent chart. So the model parameters are representative of market, and it's representing it's valuing the subject property as if it was a below average apartment building by using rents that are below market and expenses at 49%. They're pretty reasonable for a 1977 concrete building, which might typically be 45% or potentially lower. So I believe that the 49% expenses is reasonable, and the model cap rate is supported by market sales. And also the overall value at about $86,000 per unit is at the lower end of the range. So I believe that the assessed value is fair and is supported. So I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $7,762,000.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wong, Ms. Gates, questions?
Thank you. Yes, just a couple. So in terms of this property, given that it's seniors housing, building has a high proportion of small units and minimal parking, would you agree that the market may find that less desirable?
I'm not sure about that. Like, I have seen buildings with smaller units that have sold for I would say a normal amount. And actually, I've seen properties built in the same age as the subject property sell for about 97,000 per unit, and those were primarily bachelors, and they were a little bit on the smaller end, and even of newer buildings, such as 37 University Crescent. They're newer, but they're smaller units, and they still sold for 265,000 a unit. So I'm not sure if saying that smaller units equals lower value is super well supported in my experience.
Okay, because on page 5 where you have the suite sizes, would you agree that 380 square feet for a bachelor and 525 for a 1-bedroom would be considered very small?
I would consider them potentially on the smaller end of the range, but I would say it's within the range.
Okay. And your income value summary on page 6, is the model accounting for the fact that the property is social housing, or would it be treating it like a market apartment on the lower end of the rental range?
Yeah, it's treating it as if it was a below average apartment building, and as you can see by the what typical market rents might be from the market and also from the CMHC market reports, and with the expenses for at 49% for 1977 concrete building, it's probably a little bit on the higher end of the range.
Okay. That would conclude my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, Ms. Knight?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt, questions? You're muted, Ms. Nesbitt, sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that. No questions from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And no questions for me on this one particular. Thank you very much for your submission, Mr. Wong. Ms. Cates, can we walk through your presentation now?
Yes, thank you. So if you turn to page 2, we have our requested assessment of $6,145,000. On page 6, we have our property site maps, and then some exterior photos on page 7. On page 8, property description. So the subject property is on Hamilton, east of its intersection with Buchanan Boulevard in the Crestview area. Property is 6 stories, built in the late 70s. There are 92 units, which include 36 bachelors, 56 1-bedrooms, and the units are quite small. I would suggest smaller than most market apartments of this age group. 380 square feet for a bachelor, 525 for a 1-bedroom. We're not typically seeing that outside of seniors housing of this age, so I would suggest that they are quite small. And there is minimal parking. We've noted about 44 parking stalls based on our review. On page 13, we have our overview of our income approach. So the property operates on a rent geared to income basis. Therefore, the income that's achieved by the property isn't deemed to be at market. So when we look at the city's rents, we know that they're taking a proportion of CMHC. So we're not disputing those rents at $826,999 or $749 per unit per month. Essentially, for social housing properties, the rents should be below the CMHC averages to account for both the smaller size as well as the more basic or utility grade finishes, keeping in mind that CMHC averages are going to be drawing from newer properties, renovated properties in the area. So when we're looking at, since we don't know the starting and end values of CMHC being 20%, 25% below the CMHC average probably makes sense for social housing. For vacancy, we're applying a market vacancy rate of 2.6%. And for expenses, we have done a review of the expenses in place. So we are applying $436,814 or 54.2% of EGI. So on page 14, we have an overview of our approach to cap rates on social housing. The idea is that since these properties don't transact in the market, and when they do, they have a lot of atypical conditions associated, we would start with a market-based cap rate and adjust upwards for risk factors. So there's different factors we can look at broadly, the low cost or low quality construction, age, neighborhood, and low income tenancy. And there are some prior board orders that support the idea of a cap rate adjustment to social housing, even when rents are low and expenses are higher. And then on page 16, we have an overview of our view of low income tenancy. So the idea is that it's linked to deferred maintenance. When your rents aren't covering your operating expenses, you have a gap. So they rely on government funding to fill those to allow them to keep operating. But then what happens is they don't have enough funds to cover those more preventative repair and maintenance items that market apartments would be able to do. So what we see in these social housing properties is that these issues tend to increase over time, both in number of issues and severity. So when we're looking at a 70s apartment that's social housing, always been social housing, it's not going to be comparable to a 70s apartment that has been run by market standards. So on page 18, in terms of the cap rate for the subject property, we start at a base cap rate of 5.5%, and we are doing a 0.5% adjustment, first being in terms of durability and quality of income to account for the deferred maintenance, low income tenancy at the property. And then the second adjustment to account for some of the issues with seniors housing being small units, minimal parking. If this were to run at a market apartment, given the size of the units as well as the lack of parking, those would be issues that would be either very challenging or incurable. So on page 20, we have our income and expense breakdown for the property. So we have an EGI of $805,497. We have total expenses of $436,814. They include stabilized repair and maintenance at $819 a unit, as well as an allowance for reserve expenditures, $248 a suite. And then you'll notice what we do is we calculate the taxes as if it were a class 20 property. The property is 40S, so that results in beneficial tax treatment. But if this property transacted and it was no longer exclusively being run as seniors housing, then they would have to pay class 20 taxes. So that is just part of the methodology that we do for these types of properties. So we have a net operating income of $368,683 with a 6% cap rate, gives an indicated value of $6,145,000 rounded. Repair and maintenance on page 21. And then appendix starts on page 24, and we've just included snapshot from A&O as well as the financials that we've looked at, and then just some more background on social housing and cap rates. And that would conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cates. Mr. Wong, do you have questions for Ms. Cates at this point?
No questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Nesbitt, questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Knight, questions?
No, sir.
Thank you very much. I don't think I have any further questions either, quite honestly. Again, you were agreeing on the effective rents and expenses, marginal difference between the two positions, and then basically 0.75% cap rate difference.
Right.
Thank you. All right.
Sorry, just to interrupt, that rebuttal study, that's for both files, correct?
Yes, thank you.
Of course.
Okay, fair enough, and duly noted. Any summation from either party at this point?
No, thank you.
Mr. Wong?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I believe we've walked through both of the properties that were on today's docket. I appreciate your submissions both. And thank you for coming and having patience with the board. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you
a good
very
day.
much.
You as well.